Youthful folly. The beginning of the awareness process mentally in the logical system. The gate of formalization, the gate of coming up with answers. And here we have the right angle cross of explanation, its third variation. The explanation in the quarter of duality. In other words, the gift of explanation as it is seen through the duality. That crosses the 4, the 49, the 23, and the 43. Youthful folly, the energy to beguile and succeed despite ignorance. Isn't that wonderful? Freedom from retribution. Any formula, any answer is of potential value to the collective, even if it's rooted in ignorance. And any formula or any answer given at the right time cannot be punished. It is essential that the mind of answering recognizes that the answers themselves are right and wrong, and that in time one learns to recognize the difference, because it's a process, a deductive process. And the most important thing to be clear about is that when you come to the line of introspection, the foundation of the hexagram, the first line, you come to this word pleasure. Love this word. There is a pleasure in logic. All of you now know this anyway through your work in design. There is a pleasure in logic that is just exhilarating. Because you grasp something, you see it actually operate in the way in which you've grasped it, and in that sense this is a mental awakening. Logic is an incredible thing in the brain. It is like a virus. Logic is something that is not uprooted once it's in. You plant logic in the mental system, if the logic is correct, it stays. It is the core of our cellular structure, is the 15-5. Is this channel at the identity of the logical system. What generates the identity of the logical system? Pleasure. Ultimate pleasure cannot be achieved without perfect timing. Here we go again. Timing is everything. It's everything. And timing is natural when you live out your nature. Your timing is perfect when you enter into experience correctly. The moon exalted, the instinct to know the right moment and circumstances where pleasure is rewarded and not punished. The potential to recognize that there is a natural timing to the understanding process. There is a natural timing. You can't push the river. I have many, many students in my life. Some of them are so fast, it's incredible. Some of them are slow as hell. I used to think there was a difference in all of that. There isn't. There isn't. Each human being has a unique timing. That unique timing can only be found when you live out your nature. That timing may require a long period of time to digest knowledge, or not. And that it's not for us to create the comparison that says fast is good and slow is bad. Because it's not true. So many people who have a slower digestive system suffer from all kinds of verbal and psychic abuse. because they're considered to be handicapped in some way. It's not so. This is a gate that begins the most important mental process that we have as a collective. And it's rooted in that. It says everybody's timing is going to be their own. And you can't know what that is unless you live it out naturally. The earth and detriment. Timing is not a product of discipline. Exaggerated self-discipline leads to the abuse of pleasure. Oh, that's a nice thing to say on Sunday, isn't it? Timing's not a product of discipline. Don't interfere with the river. Don't get involved. So many people think they have to come up with the answer at a certain time. And of course our institutions create that. They force us to come up with the answer at exam time. They force us to come up with the answer, when we're confronted with them, and so forth and so on. And that very few human beings are allowed their natural timing in order to be able to come up with an answer that is of value, that's pleasurable, in the sense that it's not punished. So look, the moment that you're entering in properly into any kind of situation, because you're entering in properly, you're going to be allowed your timing. And then you don't end up with those difficulties. The potential to recognize, but the urge to force the timing. The second line, acceptance. It says the recognition of limitation in oneself and others leads to tolerance and the suspension of judgment. Somebody who is 4-2, second line, they don't know they have an answer to anything. And they don't care. They just don't care. They just go about their business. It's not like they're waiting to give somebody an answer. They don't even know what the question could possibly be. It's other people who think that they may have an answer. It's other people who knock at their window and disturb them and say, "Do you know which way is Jones Street?" Because, of course, if you're a second line, you're open to being called out. And other people recognize that they can call you out. And if you have the 4-2, people are always going to try to call you out to give them an answer, whether you're ready or not. Wherever you see the second line in the mental structure, and particularly when you're dealing with young people, it's very important for them to be students. It will be very important for them in their life to get a very good education, and that they will have the minds for it if they're called out. The moon exalted the glorification of feelings, the potential to recognize that not everyone can understand. Often these people, because they live in their own world, the way in which they formulate an answer doesn't connect. They don't know who's on the other side. They don't really know what questions the collective want answered. They don't really know. And they begin to see right away that others don't necessarily understand what they didn't even have to think about. Somebody calls out the 4-2 for an answer, and they ask them something that they had never really thought about. They just come up with the answer. And the other person doesn't understand how they got there and doesn't necessarily understand the answer. They can also be very, very clear paper tigers. You call them out, they're in your classroom. 4-2s are forever being asked by the teacher to give an answer. And they hate it, I hope they're not going to ask me. Because they have no idea what they're going to be asked. And they have no idea whether they're going to be able to answer it. It's only after time that they learn that they have this gift. Mars and detriment, the assertion of the ego at the expense of others' failure, the potential to take advantage of the lack of understanding in others. You know, the whole thing about the 4-2 is that it understands things without having to work at it. Now, it can be very limited because, after all, they avoid having to learn new things. But of course, because they have this gift, once they're called out, they're very good at learning and understanding and discover that other people aren't. And remember, if you get to the 13-2, you get to the bigot, and if you get to the 7-2, you get to the Democrat who denigrates other Democrats. So here you have the understanding that says, I understand and they don't. That either becomes, I understand, they don't, they're stupid, I leave them alone. Or I understand and they don't, and I do my best to get them to understand. And it's deeply argumentative because it is collective. The third line. This is mental anarchism. I have this line. And I have Saturn in this line. So I make both my Saturns very uncomfortable. You know, Saturn in irresponsibility and Saturn in the anarchist. Irresponsibility. The general refusal to apply oneself diligently when one can get by with much less effort. I mean, everybody with the fourth line can come up with answers. Everybody. This is the whole thing about logic. They can all come up with answers unless they can back them up. Opinion, detail, experimentation, the whole process. Only then can it really be substantiated and really be of value, and do they ultimately get the reward, but they can always give you an answer. This is the great gate of making excuses. You know, why were you late for school? Well, this giant condor came down. Just another answer. I mean, don't take the mind seriously. It's so important to keep the mind always in perspective. You know, it just operates through its relative limitation. So irresponsibility. Venus exalted, where art is more valued than the artist. That is the potential to enjoy the formulas with no regard to their practical application. It's very aesthetic. Oh, that's a great answer. It doesn't mean that that answer is of any value. It's just, wow, that's a great answer. A condor came down and got you? I love it. How far did you fly? Great answer. It's not about whether the answer is of any value to the collective whatsoever. None. Didn't, what was his name? Art Linkletter? Didn't he have this kid in the show in the States for years with kids? And the kids say the damnedest things or darndest things or whatever. You know, these incredible answers say. You know, this is the appreciation of just the wonder of the answer itself. And of course, what happens to the third line because they bang into things is that they end up having to make up an answer. I mean, you know, Maya gets very, very deep, this stuff. You bang into somebody and you say, I'm sorry, I was thinking about something else. So what? It's making up an answer. We're very good at that, human beings. Remember, this is the right angle cross of explanation. We need to have things explained to us. All of us. There isn't a human being on this planet that doesn't need somebody at some time to explain something to them. And of course, the whole business about logic is that at least when somebody is doing that with you, you have an opportunity to verify it through experimentation. The fourth line. The fourth line is one of those lines that analysts get to and they begin to tremble and their stomachs tighten up and they look at their client and they say, you have the line of the liar? Fools are prophets and liars too, because they can never know if what they say is true. You just have to wait and see. The liar. Role-playing as an art form. The actor. The Sun exalted. Fantasy protects and nurtures a sense of purpose and reason, no matter how misguided. The potential to find or illustrate the formulas through fantasy. These people not only love answers, but they make them up. I mean, that's what they're good at. They make them up. You know, if they can't figure out how the mathematical formula works, they make one up. By the way, that can be incredible. I mean, by making them up doesn't mean that they have no impact. Liars have great impact. Great impact. They fool you. You can fool lots of people by giving them an answer that isn't true. Now we have this whole thing about honesty and blah, blah, blah. This human being has a structure in which they have no choice but to externalize answers whether they have them or not. And if they don't have the answer, they make it up because they're afraid they'll be seen as somebody who doesn't have the answer. Because their job in this life is to externalize answers. That isn't to say that all of those answers are useless. It's not true. What often happens, though, is that they keep on trying to externalize a kind of answer or a type of answer or an answer itself that simply is unreasonable. And this leads to problems for them because everybody else says, you know, they come up with the same damn thing every time and we're sick and tired of hearing them. You know, you tell them that the world's burning down and they say, become a vegetarian. You know, you tell them your dog has fleas, they tell you to become a vegetarian. You know, they got the same answer. Saturn in detriment. Time always brings humiliation. The potential danger to see the fantasy as fact. You know, there are endless numbers of PhDs in this country who are under incredible pressure to publish. And what they're being, particularly scientific PhDs who are trying to get jobs in scientific factories and trying to get money so that they can do experiments and blah, 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 and all these things. It costs a lot of money and you got to be a star today. And they're discovering more and more that anywhere from 5 to 10% of the answers that are being given are just plain nonsense. There's no true experimentation behind them, blah, 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 all these different things. Now that's not a moral question that it's their fault and they're bad and whatever, but it really is an example of what happens when you have a gift for giving answers and then you're placed under pressure to always have the answer. And so in this sense, the detriment is about those times in which it's not your great answers that everybody appreciates, but it's the one answer that isn't correct that destroys your reputation. At the end of the fourth line in the last 7 minutes and 30 seconds, you come to the juxtaposition cross, the design Sun-Earth change, and they change from the 2343 to the 814. So you have the 4, the 49, and the 814. This is the juxtaposition cross of formulization, and this is the extreme of what we've just been looking at. That is, this is someone who has an answer for everything. And again, that is both formulization. All juxtaposition crosses take their name from the gate where the personality sun is. So the personality sun here is in the fourth gate. And the fourth gate is the gate of formulization. This is the juxtaposition cross of formulization. The theme is fixed through that particular process. So they're always coming up with answers. Now they're great in a think tank. They're great in in a collective creative process. They're great in a collective legal process. These are wonderful people for coming up with possible answers to legal strategies and formulas. In other words, they're really of value, but they're fixed. If you had to deal with them in your personal life, you have to lock up the knives at night. Because, they have an answer for everything, and that can be infuriating. The fifth and sixth lines, you get to the left angle cross, and you get to the left angle cross of revolution. The 4, the 49, the 8, and the 14. Think about those 4 gates. That is, the revolutionary principles of the 49, coupled with the logical formula, leads to the power to make contribution. A deep impact on society. When you're looking at these crosses, look at the gates, think about their keynotes. Allow yourself to grasp what that's telling you. The fifth line is the line of seduction. And you will see, for example, in the human design courses related to sexuality, that the 59.5, which is the gate of seduction, and operates in the wave of the seducer and the seduced. So one of the things to recognize is that at the universalized level, humanity isn't concerned anymore with the necessary timing. That's the foundation. What they want is they want to be seduced, and they want an answer that turns them on. That's what they want. They want an answer that's so seductive that they don't even think about whether it's been experimented with or not. These are dangerous answers. That doesn't mean that they are good or bad. They are simply dangerous answers because they can only come in times of crisis. And it doesn't mean that the answer is going to be practical, and if it's not practical, the answer will fail despite the seduction to follow that formula. The line says, allowing others to assume responsibility is a shield against potential punishment. This is where understanding the genetic continuity really helps you. That is, the general does not take responsibility. It only takes responsibility after it's been selected, after everything has fallen apart, after those who are responsible can no longer fulfill their responsibility. So it's not responsible for things going bad. That's the good fortune of the fifth line, that it always starts off being presumed innocent. Always. Now, it can end up being guilty, it can end up being bad, it can end up being wrong, but it's always presumed to be helpful. Jupiter exalted, unearned reward and recognition. This is very nice. The potential to succeed through the understanding of others. Unearned reward and recognition simply for the fact that for the 4-5, the solution is easy. It's the actualization of solutions that are difficult. The 5 sits there on the farm and says, I see what they're doing organizationally. I see they're going to run into a lot of trouble. I'm going to wait for the right moment when these idiots come to me. I could give them the simple solution in a telephone call right now. But if I did that, I wouldn't get any power. I wouldn't get any money. I wouldn't get any benefit to my reputation. So I'll just wait for them to crash. And when they crash, I know they're going to call me. And then I'm going to give them the answer that I already knew, and I get my unearned reward and recognition. Now, it doesn't mean they don't deserve it. It just means that they are able, through their timing, through their gift, to benefit from the projected field. Remember the isolation in the fifth line. They really do not want to enter. and will only do so in times of crisis. So it's not like they're bad when they say, I see they're going down, I'm not going to tell them how to get out of it. It's only a value for them in that moment of crisis, period. And then it works. Then the timing is right, and everything is timing. Pluto in detriment. A life of lip service to antiquated and unsatisfying values, a cynicism. That is the potential for cynicism that comes with always having to acknowledge the understanding of others. Now, by the way, the general is always cynical. These fools. They do not know what they're doing. And they always end up needing me and calling me when I would rather be here on the farm. These fools. And I wouldn't do it unless it was an advantage for me in the first place. These fools. But I'm glad that they're stupid because I benefit from it. That's okay. 17:5. There are no man is an island. There are no end to hierarchies. It is like that. The stupid need to be educated. And if the educator can benefit from it, so be it. Nothing inherently wrong with that. It's just our prejudices. The equation of this quarter of duality is to recognize that there is no seducer without a willing seduced. Least we forget. And that you can't put the shit on the seducer. It's a two-way street. The sixth line. This cross of revolution. It's something quite powerful to be able to wait for that moment of crisis and then seduce the forces that are weak into taking a collective answer and turning that into action. It's deeply revolutionary. And revolutions come through crisis. They don't come at any other time. By the way, when I talk about that, don't constantly see revolution as a geopolitical phenomena. You can have a revolution in your house. They happen all the time. A complete breakdown of what was, a complete shattering of the structure and its replacement in time of crisis. And often the answer doesn't come from, it can come from the children as much as the parent. Whatever the case may be, depends on what the configurations are. This is not just this grand geopolitical stage. It's in every aspect of life. Excess. Sixth line. Repeated and conscious abuse of norms will not escape discipline. When logical forces, logical aspects, do not make a contribution, they raise in the collective anger. The 58-2, this line of perversion, people who use their energy for collective processes in directions that don't please the collective. Those people that have the energy to fuel collective processes or to create concepts in collective processes, they're always going to be resented if they don't make a contribution. Why can't you share with us? All of us are sharing and you're not sharing. Who do you think you are? In the family where you have the silent one who never says anything, how much resentment that's built. The collective saying they must make their contribution. Well, not all of them can. If you're a sixth line and you're a sixth line of the fourth gate, you may have profound understanding in terms of your ability to see formulas and to recognize what formulas are right or wrong. Remember the 16:6, this gullibility, this process in the logical talent first to make all kinds of mistakes, and then from that to find its wisdom. So here is the capacity to be able to come up with many answers when you're young, only to discover that they don't always work, and after that to refuse to really give any answer because you're looking for the perfect answer. You're looking for the answer that cannot be denied. You get that, and it makes a profound difference in your life. You know, logical awareness leads to repetition and mastery. When you find an answer that works for you, it has a magical potential within your nature. The Mercury Exalted, the development through experience of techniques to apply self-restraint. You know, the experience to go through what answers work and what answers don't work. The experience to recognize that it's perfect timing that gives the answer its chance. Its chance. So many answers are not heard because the timing's wrong. You know, you try to bring in the flute and the saxophones are blaring. It doesn't work. Nobody hears it. It may be a good answer. So the gift in the sixth line here is that it gets to a point that it recognizes both what can be a good formula or not and when to apply that formula. The potential in a logical process to recognize when the understanding is not complete and to have the patience to wait out the process, to wait for the right answer. The detriment. Mars, the gall to accept punishment as the price of excess. Despite recognizing the incompleteness, a lack of patience with the process. You know, they go up on the hill and they see that nobody has a decent answer and their answers are better. And instead of really waiting to be absolutely clear, you know, they offer their answer only to find that that doesn't work either. Remember that the sixth line is actually at its best being a confirming of the hexagram's nature, rather than actually applying the hexagram's power. You know, six lines are great as witness judges. That's their natural gift. When you bring the sixth line, when you bring the fool on the hill down into the valley, it does not mean that they fit in. They're not particularly comfortable. It really has to be an incredible answer to be able to do that for them. Wherever you carry the sixth line in your design, and particularly where you carry it in your Sun-Earth cross configuration, it's so important to be clear that until you find that thing for you, you're not complete. And if you do not find it, then your life is about being of value to others. You know, what you've discounted along the way is important knowledge for those who follow. And all six lines have that gift in them. When you get to the close of this logic process, and when you get to the point where you really have an answer, where do you go? You go to the gate of making commitments to the experience of what that answer brings. We move to the 29th gate, the abysmal.